The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the quiet suburban night, painting the brick house in a chaotic wash of color. A patrolman snapped his hand to his holster, demanding identification from the black man sitting calmly on the porch. He had absolutely no idea the badge resting in the man's pocket outranked his entire department. The neighborhood of Oakwood Estates was the kind of idyllic, manicured suburb where the loudest sound on an evening was usually the hum of an automated sprinkler system. It was an enclave of sweeping lawns, wraparound porches, and quiet affluence located just outside the city limits of Grand Rapids, Michigan. For Donovan Sterling, a man who had spent months embedded in a grueling, high-stakes undercover operation in Detroit, this house was meant to be a sanctuary. Donovan had closed on the property recently. Boxes still cluttered the living room, forming cardboard skyscrapers in the dimly lit interior. But tonight, he just wanted to breathe. He stepped out onto his own mahogany front porch, wearing a faded gray college hoodie, loose athletic sweatpants, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. He held a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and a thick paperback thriller in the other. Settling into the cushioned wicker chair, he exhaled, letting the cool autumn air wash over him. For the first time in nearly a year, he did not have to look over his shoulder. He was wrong. 2 houses down, peering through the slats of her expensive plantation blinds, was Linda Whittaker. Linda was the self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Estates, a woman who treated the neighborhood watch like a military command. She had noticed the sold sign come down, but she had not seen the new owners arrive. What she saw now was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a hoodie sitting in the shadows of the porch of a $500,000 home. In Linda's mind, the equation calculated itself instantly, bypassing logic and leaping straight to prejudice. She picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the keypad to dial 911. Her voice was a hushed, frantic whisper as she spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious individual. He is lurking on the porch of the old Miller house. I know the new owners are not moved in yet. He is just sitting there casing the place. He looks aggressive. You need to send someone right now before he breaks a window." Moments later, the tranquility of the street was shattered. Donovan did not hear the siren, but he saw the headlights kill their high beams as a Grand Rapids Police Department cruiser rolled silently down the street, creeping like a predator. The cruiser stopped dead in front of his driveway. The driver cut the engine, and suddenly a blinding million-candle-power spotlight ignited, hitting Donovan squarely in the face. Donovan squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. His pulse did not spike. He did not panic. Over a decade of rigorous training at Quantico and years in the field had hardwired his nervous system to remain ice-cold under pressure. He simply placed his coffee mug on the small wicker table beside him, marked his page in his book, and waited. The heavy doors of the cruiser opened. Out stepped Officer Derek Harlan, a veteran of the force whose barrel-chested swagger and tightly clipped haircut spoke of a man who enjoyed the authority of the badge a little too much. From the passenger side emerged Officer Riley Bennett, a fresh-faced rookie barely out of the academy, looking tense and entirely reliant on his senior partner's lead. "Hey, you on the porch? Keep your hands where I can see them." Harlan barked, his voice carrying the sharp, jagged edge of a command meant to intimidate. He marched up the paved driveway, his heavy boots crunching loudly, his right hand resting casually but purposefully on the butt of his service weapon. Donovan remained seated. He rested his hands openly on the armrests of his chair. "Can I help you, officers?" His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely stripped of fear. "Stand up and step down off the porch," Harlan ordered, closing the distance to the bottom of the porch steps. Officer Bennett fanned out to the right, his flashlight sweeping the perimeter of the house, though his eyes kept darting back to Donovan. "I am perfectly comfortable where I am, officer," Donovan replied calmly. Is there a problem? The problem is we got a call about a suspicious person trespassing on this property. Harlan sneered, shining his own heavy maglite directly into Donovan's eyes. So, I am going to need to see some ID right now. Donovan did not flinch against the light. I am not trespassing. I live here. I just bought the house. Harlan let out a harsh, skeptical laugh. Yeah, sure you did. Look, buddy, I do not have time for games tonight. You do not look like you own a house in this zip code. Stand up, turn around, and hand over your driver's license. The blatant profiling hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Donovan felt a familiar, cold anger tightening in his chest. But he kept his expression utterly neutral. He knew the law. He knew it better than the man standing on his lawn. Michigan is not a stop-and-identify state, unless an officer has reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed. Sitting on a porch drinking coffee did not meet that threshold. Officer, Donovan began, his tone shifting from casual to precise. Under the Fourth Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion to demand my identification. A baseless phone call from a neighbor who does not know me does not constitute reasonable suspicion. I am sitting on my own property. I am not committing a crime. Harlan's jaw clenched. The textbook legal response was not what he expected. It challenged his authority. And for a cop like Harlan, challenging his authority was the ultimate offense. Are you a lawyer now? Harlan snapped, taking a step up onto the first wooden stair of the porch. The tactical advantage of the high ground was still Donovan's, and Harlan hated it. I am giving you a lawful order. You are interfering with a police investigation. If you do not produce an ID in the next moments, I am going to pull you off that chair and put you in cuffs for obstruction. Try me. Officer Bennett shifted uneasily on the grass. Derek, the rookie muttered quietly. Maybe we should just run the address, see if there is a name. Shut up, Bennett, Harlan snapped without looking back. His eyes were locked on Donovan. I am not asking again. ID now. Donovan looked at Harlan. He saw the aggressive posture, the flared nostrils, the hand gripping the holster, ready to draw. He saw a man who had likely done this 100 times to 100 different people, who did not have the power to fight back. Donovan decided it was time to end the game, but not before letting Harlan dig the hole just a little bit deeper. Officer? Donovan said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the kind of quiet, absolute authority that usually made seasoned criminals hesitate. I want you to think very carefully about your next move. You are standing on private property. You are threatening to assault and unlawfully arrest a man who has broken no laws. If you touch me, you will be crossing a line that you cannot uncross. Harlan's face flushed a deep mottled red. The veins in his thick neck bulged. He saw red. He did not see a citizen exercising his rights. He saw a subordinate refusing to bow. That is it, Harlan growled. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster, a loud, audible snap that echoed in the quiet night. He drew his handcuffs with his left hand and lunged forward, taking the remaining porch steps in 2 massive strides. Get on the ground now. Donovan finally stood up. He did not rush, but he moved with a sudden fluid grace that caught Harlan off guard. He towered over the officer by a full 3 inches, his broad shoulders squaring up. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He held them out, palms open at chest level, a classic de-escalation posture. I am reaching into my back left pocket, Donovan announced, his voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. He maintained intense, unbroken eye contact with Harlan. I'm going to retrieve my identification. Do not overreact. Harlan froze, his hand still hovering near his weapon, his other hand gripping the metal cuffs. "Do it slow." 2 fingers, he commanded, his breathing heavy. Bennett had drawn his taser, the red laser dot dancing nervously on Donovan's chest. Slowly, deliberately, Donovan reached into his sweatpants pocket. He did not pull out a standard, flimsy plastic driver's license. Instead, he pulled out a heavy, dark blue leather trifold wallet. He brought it up to chest height and flicked his wrist. The leather dropped open. There, gleaming under the harsh glare of the police spotlight, was a heavy gold shield topped with an eagle. Right beside it was a photo ID card bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Donovan A. Sterling, Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. The silence that fell over the porch was absolute. The chirping of the crickets seemed to abruptly stop. Harlan stared at the gold shield. The aggressive sneer on his face melted away, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked as though he might pass out. His hand fell away from his holster, as if the plastic grip had suddenly turned to red-hot iron. Down on the lawn, Officer Bennett lowered his taser, his mouth dropping open in a silent O of horror. Donovan let the silence stretch. He let the reality of the situation crush down on Harlan's shoulders. He watched the arrogant patrol cop shrink before his eyes. "Assistant Attorney General Donovan Sterling," Donovan read out loud, his voice as cold as liquid nitrogen. He snapped the wallet shut and slipped it back into his pocket. Harlan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. "Sir, we did not know." "You did not know?" Donovan took a step forward. Harlan instinctively took a step back, nearly stumbling down the wooden stairs. "You did not know because you did not care to ask before you escalated. You did not care to investigate. You received a call about a black man sitting on a porch, and you arrived with your hand on your gun, ready to manufacture a crime where none existed." "Sir, we were just following up on a suspicious person call," Harlan stammered, his tough guy facade completely shattering. He was practically vibrating with panic. He knew exactly what it meant to pull a gun and threaten false arrest on a senior federal official. "No, officer," Donovan corrected sharply. "You were attempting to enforce your own personal bias under the color of law. You demanded identification without reasonable suspicion. You threatened a citizen with false arrest and physical assault. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights within moments of arriving on my property." Donovan stepped down one stair, forcing Harlan to retreat entirely off the porch. "What is your name and badge number?" Donovan demanded. "Harlan, sir. Derek Harlan. Badge 412 and yours," Donovan called out to the rookie in the yard. "Bennett, sir. Riley Bennett. Badge 899. The younger cop squeaked out, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "Well, Officer Harlan," Donovan said, crossing his arms over his chest, "here is the part where your night gets significantly worse. You see, I just transferred out of undercover operations. I was recently promoted. Do you want to know what my new assignment is as Assistant Attorney General?" Harlan stared at him, terrified of the answer, unable to speak. "I oversee the Joint Federal Civil Rights and Public Corruption Task Force operating in this district." Donovan's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "My sole job is to investigate police officers who abuse their authority, violate constitutional rights, and operate like heavily armed bullies." Harlan actually swayed on his feet. The color that had drained from his face was replaced by a sickly, pale sweat. "Mr. Sterling, please. It was a misunderstanding. The lighting was bad. The caller was frantic." "Save it for the internal affairs interview, Harlan." Donovan cut him off effortlessly. And save it for the federal civil rights inquiry I am going to personally open on you tomorrow morning." Donovan pointed a finger toward the cruiser. "You are going to get back in your vehicle. You are going to leave my property. And when your shift ends, I suggest you call your union representative, because I promise you, I am going to make sure you never wear that badge again." Harlan opened his mouth to plead, to beg. But Donovan turned his back on him, walked up the stairs, picked up his coffee mug, and sat back down in his wicker chair. He opened his book. "Get off my lawn," Donovan said without looking up from the page. Humiliated, terrified, and utterly broken, Harlan turned and practically sprinted back to the cruiser. Bennett was already in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. The cruiser's engine roared to life. The spotlight snapped off, and the car sped away into the night, leaving Donovan Sterling to his quiet evening. A cold smile finally touched his lips. He had wanted a quiet night, but taking down a corrupt cop from the comfort of his own porch was not a bad way to break in the new house. The morning sun broke over Grand Rapids, painting the city in bright, unforgiving light. Inside the sprawling concrete fortress of the Grand Rapids Police Department headquarters, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Officer Derek Harlan sat at his cramped desk in the bullpen, nursing a lukewarm coffee that tasted like ash. His knuckles were white as he gripped the styrofoam cup. He had spent the entire night rationalizing his massive blunder. By morning, he had convinced himself that Assistant Attorney General Donovan Sterling was just blowing smoke. Federal officials do not waste their time on local jurisdiction squabbles, Harlan thought, trying to steady his shaking hands. He was just flexing his title. No paperwork was filed. No arrest was made. It is a ghost call. Harlan had purposefully omitted the Oakwood Estates address from his end-of-shift report, logging the time as a routine neighborhood patrol. He thought he was in the clear. He thought he had buried his mistake in the bureaucratic noise of a busy precinct. He was disastrously wrong. At the start of the shift, the heavy glass doors of the bullpen swung open. Captain Victor Langford, a man whose stern face looked like it had been carved from weathered granite, marched through the aisles. He did not look left or right. He walked straight to Harlan's desk. "Harlan, my office now," Langford barked, his voice echoing over the clatter of keyboards and ringing phones. "Bring Bennett." A cold spike of dread drove itself through Harlan's stomach. He stood up, avoiding the curious glances of his fellow officers, and motioned for his rookie partner. Officer Riley Bennett looked like he had not slept a wink. His uniform was slightly rumpled, and dark circles framed his eyes. When they entered the captain's office, Harlan froze. Captain Langford was not alone. Sitting casually in the leather guest chair was Donovan Sterling. He was no longer wearing the faded sweatpants and hoodie. Today, Sterling wore a tailored charcoal three-piece suit that screamed federal authority. Beside him stood a man Harlan recognized with terrifying clarity: Chief Elias Grant. "Shut the door, Derek," Chief Grant ordered softly. It was the softness that terrified Harlan the most. "Chief, Captain, Harlan started, but Langford held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Assistant Attorney General Sterling has just spent the last hour playing a very interesting piece of audio for us," Captain Langford said, his voice dripping with disgust. He pressed a button on his desk speaker. The room filled with the scratchy, unmistakable sound of a police dashcam audio feed. "The problem is, we got a call about a suspicious person trespassing. You do not look like you own a house in this zip code." The recording played Harlan's sneering voice perfectly. It captured every threat, every escalation, and the loud, unmistakable snap of his holster retention strap being undone. Harlan whipped his head around to stare at Bennett. The rookie had his eyes glued to the floor, his face pale. "You thought you muted your mic, Harlan," Sterling said, his voice calm, smooth, and lethal. But Officer Bennett here had the presence of mind to engage his personal body camera audio when you stepped out of the cruiser. He recognized an illegal escalation when he saw one. It turns out your rookie has a better grasp of the Constitution than you do. The twist hit Harlan like a physical blow. His own partner had recorded him. "Bennett, you rat," Harlan hissed, taking a half step toward the younger cop. "Stand down," Chief Grant roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk. "You do not say a word to him, Harlan. You are standing on the edge of a cliff, and you are one breath away from jumping." Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Last night I told you I was going to open a civil rights inquiry. I was not bluffing. But what you did not know, Derek, is that your name was already in our system." Harlan's head snapped back to the federal official. "What?" "Months ago, a local mechanic named Arthur Pendleton filed a brutality complaint against you," Sterling explained, pacing slowly across the room. "He claimed you pulled him over for a broken taillight, dragged him out of his car, and dislocated his shoulder when he asked why he was being detained. Internal Affairs cleared you because there was insufficient evidence. Your dash cam mysteriously malfunctioned that night." Sterling stopped and leaned over Harlan, his dark eyes boring into the disgraced cop. "But Arthur Pendleton's cousin works for the Department of Justice. A quiet, preliminary probe was launched into your arrest records. We found a pattern. Multiple complaints of excessive force and illegal searches, all of them involving minorities, all of them mysteriously cleared by a broken camera or missing audio." The room was dead silent. Harlan was sweating profusely now, the reality of his situation closing in around him like a vice. "I was undercover in Detroit." "Yes," Sterling continued. "But the task force I mentioned, it is entirely real. And as of this morning, my office officially took jurisdiction over every single one of your past arrests. We are executing a federal warrant on your locker, your patrol car, and your personal residence as we speak." "You cannot do this," Harlan whispered, his voice cracking. "I have given years to this city." "You have not given anything. You have been taking," Chief Grant interjected sharply. "Badge, gun, now. You are suspended without pay, pending a federal indictment." Harlan, his hands trembling violently, slowly unclipped his weapon and placed it on the desk, followed by his gold shield. The metallic clatter sounded like a prison door slamming shut. The fallout from the Oakwood Estates incident did not just move. It descended with the terrifying, undeniable speed of an avalanche. The real-life consequences hit back with a vengeance that shocked the entire city of Grand Rapids, peeling back the polished veneer of the precinct to reveal the rot underneath. When the federal execution team breached Harlan's home, it was not just to retrieve a badge and a gun. They dismantled his life entirely. Stashed in a heavy fireproof safe hidden behind drywall in his basement, agents uncovered more than just a history of bigotry. They found the tools of a predator. Dozens of small, unmarked baggies of narcotics, digital scales, and unregistered drop guns with filed-off serial numbers. Harlan had not just been bullying citizens. He had been actively engineering their ruin, planting evidence to justify his illegal searches and secure airtight convictions based on his twisted gut feelings. The revelation sent seismic shockwaves through the local judicial system. Dozens of Harlan's past arrests were immediately flagged for emergency review by the district attorney's office. Innocent people, men and women, who had accepted devastating plea deals simply out of terror and a lack of resources to fight a rigged system, were suddenly weeping in attorneys' offices as their convictions were overturned. The harvest of his corruption was finally being burned to the ground. But Harlan was not the only one to face the brutal, uncompromising backlash of karma. The Federal Civil Rights Task Force, meticulous and unyielding, subpoenaed the county's 911 call records. Linda Whitaker, the neighborhood watch zealot, who had initiated the entire cascade of events with a single prejudiced phone call, was dragged kicking and screaming into the unforgiving spotlight. Sterling's team discovered that Linda did not just make a single mistake. She had a long, thoroughly documented history of weaponizing emergency dispatch against minorities in the area. She had called the police on delivery drivers looking for addresses, landscapers taking their lunch breaks, and most damningly, a child selling wrapping paper for a school fundraiser. Weeks after the incident on the porch, Linda Whitaker, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater, answered a sharp knock at her front door. She expected a delivery. Instead, she found two stern-faced federal agents standing on her customized welcome mat. Her arrogant indignation shattered the moment the heavy metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She was formally charged with multiple state counts of making false police reports and a heavy federal charge of misusing emergency services to violate civil rights. A landmark legal precedent the Department of Justice was eager to set. The local news stations camped out on her meticulously manicured lawn, broadcasting her tearful, humiliating perp walk to the entire state. The affluent Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, desperate to amputate the scandal before it infected their property values, immediately convened an emergency board meeting. They voted unanimously to strip her of her neighborhood watch title and issued crippling fines for bringing severe reputational damage to the community. Meanwhile, Officer Riley Bennett, the terrified rookie who had the moral courage to hit record on his body camera, found himself navigating a precarious minefield. Initially, he was hailed as a whistleblower by the public, but he faced an intense, freezing backlash from the toxic old guard elements of the police union. Whispers of rat followed him down the precinct hallways. However, Chief Elias Grant was a man of his word. Recognizing the young officer's integrity, the chief personally sponsored Bennett's immediate transfer out of patrol and straight into the detective bureau, throwing a massive protective shield over his career. Bennett became the foundational pillar of the prosecution, a pivotal, unwavering witness in the federal trial against his former partner. Months later, the heavy wooden gavel finally fell in a packed federal courtroom. Derek Harlan, entirely stripped of his swagger, his unearned authority, and his freedom, stood trembling in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He looked small, hollowed out by the immense weight of his own hubris. The jury found him guilty on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The presiding judge, his voice echoing with utter disgust as he cited Harlan's egregious systemic abuse of the public trust, handed down a crushing sentence: a long term in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. Donovan Sterling did not attend the sentencing. He did not need to gloat, nor did he need to see a broken man sent away to feel validated. The system had worked, forced into motion by a man who refused to be a victim on his own property. That evening, Donovan was back on his wide mahogany porch in Oakwood Estates, dressed in his comfortable sweatpants and a faded gray hoodie. The neighborhood was profoundly quiet. The autumn air was crisp, and the streetlights cast a warm, peaceful glow over the sprawling lawns. He took a slow, deep sip of his black coffee, opened his paperback thriller to the exact page he had marked, and finally settled into the absolute sanctuary he had earned. The Oakwood Estates incident sparked a nationwide conversation about accountability and the abuse of power. Derek Harlan traded his badge for a federal prison jumpsuit, a stark reminder that sheer arrogance cannot outrun justice. Donovan Sterling finally found the peace he sought on his porch, knowing his actions protected countless others. The scales of justice though sometimes delayed, inevitably balance themselves when true courage confronts corruption.
He had been crying about losing it for almost an hour, so rather than listen to him wailing on about it for any longer, she took it upon herself to find it for him. And yet, as she walked through the pines, determined to stop her brother's crying, something jumped out from behind a tree and struck her so hard in the side of the head that she blacked out for a moment. She woke up on the ground, with something on top of her, something which appeared to sport jet-black hair all over its body. It drooled as it let out a guttural growl, savaging her on the forest floor. And then, as she tried to resist, it began striking her again. The next thing she remembered, it howled before it rolled away from her and found its feet. She thought the ordeal was over and that the creature believed that she was dead, until suddenly it lunged at her and began hitting her around the head and neck until she blacked out again. She later said that she believed that she was in heaven when her father and uncle first woke her up. And then when she realized she was not, the pain was so great that all she wanted to do was die. But then once she recovered, the only thing which frightened her more than that thought was the image of that monster writhing and howling on top of her. One of the men in attendance when Emily described her attacker was the county sheriff, and he soon organized a search of the woods around Story, a search which included not only deputies but also a whole bunch of volunteers armed with shotguns and rifles. But on account of just how nervous and twitchy everyone was, it took just about all the deputies' organizational skills just to keep the volunteers from shooting one another. Needless to say, the hunt for Emily Barlow's attacker was unsuccessful, and the same could be said for the second hunt, which was mounted that very next day. But in the early morning hours of the third day, a deputy named Harlan got up before dawn, put on his uniform and a blaze orange hunting cap, and then went walking off into the woods with a rifle slung over his shoulder. According to my great-uncle Ray, Deputy Harlan was half Choctaw on his father's side, and that his daddy had taught him all kinds of hunting and tracking skills as a boy. The county sheriff had not wanted to let him off the leash, as it were, on account of all the volunteers. But on that third day, and tired of a bunch of clumsy but well-meaning hunters slowing him down, Deputy Harlan walked off into the woods to bag himself a monster. He started right back at the place the attack happened, and then from there, he wandered deeper and deeper into the woods until he reached a stream out near a hill they call Calibri Mountain. It was just after dawn had broken, so there was a soft blue light breaking through the trees. And then, as Deputy Harlan was walking by the river's edge, smack bang in the middle of nowhere, he looked up to see something which stopped him in his tracks. Downstream from him by maybe 50 or 60 yards, a man was kneeling by the water's edge and drinking from the stream. Only, it could not have been a man. The thing was dressed and would look like rags and was covered in that same thick dark hair that Emily Barlow had described. Dark fur covered its exposed arms and shoulders and ran all the way down to his legs before stopping at filthy black pads on the soles of its feet. Harlan stared in disbelief at this creature, as unaware of his presence. It continued to drink. Then finally, Harlan suddenly snapped out of his stupor and brought his rifle to his shoulder. Yet, after hearing the distinct chambering of a round of Harlan's rifle, the creature looked up, saw him, then bolted off into the trees on two legs at speeds that seemed impossibly fast. Harlan later said that he was too shaken to even attempt to shoot. Not just because of how shaken he was, but because whatever that thing was, it needed to be brought in alive. Even as far back as then, people believed in Sasquatches and mountain men. Deputy Harlan was a practical man and did not believe that there was a single animal out there that he had not seen during one of his hunts in the woods. So imagine his shock and surprise when he saw what he believed was some kind of missing link right there before his eyes. He told the county sheriff what he saw the moment he got back to Mount Ida, and when he did, the sheriff went about organizing a third search to be conducted that very next day. Only instead of combing the woods through the morning and the afternoon, the deputies and just a handful of the best hunters would set up hides near bodies of water where they would watch and wait for any sign of this strange creature. Unfortunately, the attempt to catch it unawares again was unsuccessful, but that just made it clear that they were dealing with a highly intelligent and therefore highly dangerous predator. But Deputy Harlan was not ready to give up yet. After their unsuccessful stakeout, he stayed in the woods and made his way back toward Calibri Mountain, where he had first studied the strange beast. He walked for miles and miles, zigzagging through the woods, searching for any and all traces of it, and he even had to spend a night in the forest to cover all the ground he wanted. He said, being huddled around the campfire, knowing that thing was out there in the darkness, it was the most scared he had ever been in his life. But he made it through the night all the same, and at dawn, he kept on searching for that thing that attacked Emily Barlow. Deputy Harlan kept on creeping through the trees, knowing that he could be just seconds away from running into that thing again, since it seemed to be active around dawn. And then right as he started to get within a mile or two of Murder Creek, which actually is a real place, we even looked it up, he started seeing all kinds of animal carcasses, all of which appeared to have been stripped of their meat. And when he found tufts of that thick black hair around some of the skeletal remains, Deputy Harlan knew that he must be close. But as he got closer and closer to Murder Creek, he could have never prepared himself for what he was about to discover. Because as he crept along the side of the hill, he spotted a small cave. It was no more than a flat triangular tunnel. But right there, feasting on the raw meat of some small, furry animal, was the creature he had spotted just days prior. Deputy Harlan raised his rifle, aiming it at the creature and trapping it inside of its own shallow den. But as it looked up and locked eyes with the deputy, he realized it was no wild beast. Because despite the thick black hair covering the thing's body, its eyes were distinctly human. The thing held Deputy Harlan's gaze as it dropped what it was eating, but it did not try to escape. Instead, it began to shake its head in a voice that sounded like it had only the slightest grasp of English as it pleaded, "No." Deputy Harlan was so stunned that he thought he might fall down. But as he continued to stare, aghast and open-mouthed, he realized the thing was not a thing at all, but rather a man, a young man, and one with a very peculiar affliction. Since Deputy Harlan had already resigned himself to wandering the woods after that previous morning's stakeout, he was carrying some hard cheese and bacon wrapped in a little cloth. He took it out and offered some to the strange young man, who gobbled it down greedily as soon as it was offered. And then over the next few hours or so, he gained the young man's trust and began to learn a thing or two about him. It was not clear exactly how it happened, but Deputy Harlan realized that while the young man must have been abandoned as a child, fear and suspicion had led him to a life in the wild. He spent his formative years in the small town of Back in Montgomery County. But whenever people saw him, they got scared. And when they got scared, they got violent. The man had become all too accustomed to fleeing at the sight of them. And even when Deputy Harlan felt he had earned his trust, the young man would still flinch whenever he spoke too loud or moved too fast. As night drew in, Deputy Harlan made a campfire just a few feet away from the young man's den. Now, it must have been the first time that he had seen a fire up close in decades, because while he was not strictly scared of it, the process of its creation fascinated him. And then while demonstrating a much stronger ability to comprehend rather than speak, Deputy Harlan spent that night convincing the strange young man to follow him back into town that next morning. Not only to begin his reintegration into society, but to prove that he could not have been the one to attack young Emily Barlow. But then, right around the same time Harlan was earning the man's trust, something terrible was unfolding back in a tiny Montgomery County hamlet known as Sims. That afternoon, a homemaker by the name of Carol McCormick was putting away some of her husband's laundry. Prohibition had ended not just a couple of years before, and her husband Robert liked to enjoy a few drinks with his buddies after work without having to worry about the sheriff showing up to throw him in jail. And this meant that he would not be back till after dark. But this also meant that when she found a small silver heart necklace tucked into the back of his sock drawer with a name May engraved onto it, she had hours and hours to wallow in grief and anger before Bob finally came home. Carol was convinced her husband was having an affair. It had been months since he touched her. He was heading out at odd times to do things he did not want to talk about. And even worse, he had been forgetting to pick up her crocheting supplies from the Mount Ida General Store. And so when he staggered through the door sometime around then, stinking of whiskey and cigarettes, Carol McCormick demanded to know who in the hell this May lady was. Her husband, unprepared for such an ambush, could not provide an answer to her question. And while Carol rather correctly interpreted this as a sign of Bob's guilt, he was not guilty of that which she accused him of. And when everything went down, when Carol suddenly realized who May was and who the necklace really belonged to, she ran screaming from the house and out into the night. Carol had remembered hearing something about how, while all of Emily Barlow's torn clothes were found around her body, one thing was missing from the scene, a necklace given to Emily by her sister, but one that had originally been a gift to her. And the name of Emily's older sister was Mabel Juliet Barlow, more commonly referred to as May.
Carol knew most of that. Everyone knew everyone in Montgomery County back then. She just could not bring herself to entertain the possibility till she saw that look in her husband's eyes. But Bob did not just let her go that night. Oh no, he could not. He could not have his good lady wife going around telling tales and ruining his good reputation over what he considered to be a drunken mistake.
And so he followed her outside into the night and tried bashing her head in with a shovel. Carol's screams were the only thing that saved her life. That and the shotgun one of their neighbors held when he came out to see what in the hell was going on out there. He told Bob if he so much as moved, he would blow his goddamn head off. And then his wife came out to join him.
And after gasping at the sight of her husband holding their beloved Bob at gunpoint, she grabbed the rope that he used to tie Bob up, and he was off in the direction of Mount Ida to grab the sheriff. Uncle Ray said Bob McCormick spent the night in the county jail and did so on 2 charges of attempted murder, among other things. The next morning, a still weak Emily was brought to his cell and asked if that was the man who attacked her. She did not have to say yes, because when she erupted into screams and cries, stumbling into the arms of her father to cry and cry and cry, it was all the confirmation anyone needed. And then, by pure happenstance, right around the time Emily Barlow was led away from the county jail, Deputy Harlan walked back into town with that young man following close behind. Harlan had told him not to be scared, and that any sour reactions from the Mount Ida citizenry would be met with a brief but all-encompassing explanation. The man was no monster. He had an illness. He had been neglected, and it was time to start making things right for him. While Bob McCormick had to await the date of his trial in the county jail, the young man stayed with Deputy Harlan along with his wife and young son. He was taught to live like a person again, how to wash and dress himself, and how to eat at a table using knives and forks. It was not an overnight transformation. It took time. And as he learned to speak again, the young man took the name Elias. Another reason my great-uncle Ray remembered the tale so well. He took the name after Mrs. Harlan's Bible study sessions helped him learn to read, and saying he was inspired to do so by Elias's story. Elias was a man betrayed by his family, one who was sold into slavery and became a prisoner in a foreign land. Elias eventually forgave his family and reportedly told them in the scripture, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." And by the time Bob McCormack was being sentenced to years of hard labor, Deputy Harlan was trying to find young Elias a job. Given how skittish he was, as well as his lack of general education, Elias was far too anxious and frightened for regular employment. But Deputy Harlan did not give up on him. And after hearing of a freak show that was attached to a traveling carnival, he paid the show a visit when it passed through Montgomery County. But rather than find a cruel and exploitative operation that took advantage of the so-called freaks in its employment, Deputy Harlan found a sanctuary for such people. There was a bearded lady named Leela, a tiny little dwarf man who danced the Lindy Hop, and a fellow who called himself the Lizard Man, but who in reality just had some kind of skin condition. These people welcomed Elias with open arms, telling them that he was finally in a place where folk understood and did not judge. And then, since he was born and raised in a little town just down the road from Story, young Elias's stage name had just about been decided for him. For backstage, he would be Elias, their compatriot and co-worker. But to the audience, he would be the weird and wonderful Wolfman, and they would be charged money for the honor of seeing and talking to him. Word has it that Deputy Harlan cried a few silent tears on the day that the carnival left town, not out of sadness, but because of the way Elias had thanked him for saving his life. And then after that, the story of Emily Barlow, Deputy Harlan, and the Wolfman passed on into legend and became a tale passed down from one generation to another. Like I said, my cousin and I went away and did our own research because we did not think that there was a single chance in hell that a town called Story and a creek called Murder were real places. And like I may have also said, every single piece that Uncle Ray mentioned checked out. And so to me, the story of the Wolfman is all the proof I needed that sometimes the truth is far, far stranger than fiction could ever be. My name is Irina. I recently became a subscriber of yours, and I think I have a story from my younger years that you might be interested in. I currently live in London with my husband and my grown-up daughter. But I grew up in Russia during the Soviet times, and in the summer, when I was a 26-year-old junior researcher at the Leningrad Institute of Geology. My work was, in a word, boring. But back then, working at a university allowed you certain privileges, such as the opportunity for travel. So when I was offered a spot on a research trip set to Siberia, I jumped at the chance. Myself and a team of 7 other researchers flew from Moscow to Irkutsk, then to Krasnoyarsk. Then from there, a much smaller plane would fly us out to a town on the banks of the Yenisei River named Zotinyo, where we would study nearby coal deposits. The plane was an old Antonov, the smaller propeller-driven kind that smelled of oil and was horribly uncomfortable to sit in. We sat on the metal benches holding our sample bags on our laps, shouting to be heard over the plane's rattling. But then, a couple of hours into the flight, the engines start coughing. First one, then the other. The pilot came on the intercom and said it was nothing to worry about. But only a minute later, the plane dropped hard. People screamed, and I remember gripping the metal bench so hard that the edge bit into my fingers. The sound of rushing air got louder and louder until it sounded like it was screaming. Tree branches came rushing up at us through the windows before a sudden impact threw all of us forward. The glass smashed and metal groaned, and then the next thing I remember, I was waking up in the wreck to this horrible silence hanging in the air. My head hurt and my knee was in agony, but I could just about stand. The pilot and co-pilot were still in their seats, but they had not made it. The rest of us were alive, but in bad shape. Victor had a broken leg. Nadia's arm was so badly broken that she could not stop crying, while the others had an assortment of broken legs and twisted ankles, along with cuts, bruises, and a few cracked ribs. The plane's radio was broken, so there was no calling for help. Nobody could walk far, and I was the only one on my feet, and so it only made sense that it was me who went to look for help. We had some supplies that survived the crash. It was little more than 2 plastic bottles of water from the cockpit and 3 small bags of peanuts that the steward had handed out before takeoff. I knew I could make them all last quite a while, but we were in one of the largest uninterrupted forests in the world. It stretched in every direction, thick, dark, and endless, and we did not have even the faintest of idea of where we were. There was a flare gun, but we had to wait until the sun had set for that to be truly effective. And until then, what choice was there other than to make the most of what little energy I had? I stuffed the bottled water and peanuts into my coat pockets, listening as my injured comrades wished me luck. And then I started walking toward what I assumed was the east. The first day was the easiest. I followed what looked like a game trail, one that was infested with mosquitoes, which bit at my face and neck. And by the evening time, my knee was throbbing, and I had already drank more than half a bottle of water. I stopped where there was a shelter, ate a handful of peanuts, and then slept against a fallen log for a few hours until it got too cold to sleep. On the second day, the wolves found me. I heard them first, their low howls far off at first, but then they got closer. I saw their shapes between the trees, all gray and thin, and there had to be at least 6 or 7 of them, and they did not rush or charge me. They just followed at first, keeping 20 or 30 meters back. I picked up a branch and waved it, shouting at the top of my voice to seem big and scary. They stayed away, but they did not leave. That night, I made a small fire with dried twigs and pine needles. I sat with my back to the flames, watching for any sign of those wolves, and before long, I could see the flames glowing in their eyes. I took a stick from the fire and waved it around while shouting in hopes that it would scare them off. It did not. They just kept watching and waiting. And by the third day, my water was almost gone, and the peanuts were down to 1 bag. My lips were cracked from the dehydration, and every single step hurt like a fresh wound. The forest looked the same in every direction. Nothing but tall pines and fallen logs covering as far as the eye could see. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice, telling myself the others back at the wreck were still alive and that I was going to make it. The wolves were still there, getting closer the more I slowed. I kept the branch in my hand like a club, but I knew that if they came for me, I was done for. Late on the 4th afternoon, I smelled wood smoke from a campfire, and as far as I thought, I was imagining it like a kind of forest mirage or something. But then, I heard the sound of a loud saws, and I started walking faster. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to burst, because I knew I had done it. And then, as the trees opened up a little, there it was. A small logging camp stretched out in front of me. There had to be 5 or 6 wooden huts, a big pile of cut logs, and a generator chugging away and belching out some black smoke. Men in padded jackets and felt boots moved between the buildings, but they did not seem to be Russian. And I soon discovered that they were actually Chinese migrant workers working under an international labor program. I had heard rumors that some contract workers came from China to cut timber in the Far East, but I never thought that I would ever see them up close. As I approached, one of them spotted me and shouted. They all stopped, and then a short man with a black cap came forward, and he spoke with a very heavy Russian accent. But I could understand him. He asked where I had come from and what had happened to me. and I told him that there was a plane crash, that others were hurt, and that they needed help. He did not ask many questions. He simply brought me inside to the nearest hut to warm me up. Someone gave me some hot tea with sugar, and then they fed me rice and some kind of salted fish. I told them about the wreck, about the wolves, about the peanuts I had left. And then when I thought about my comrades, I started to cry. The man with the black cap, his name was Lao, and he tried to comfort me and then promised that he would get help. There was a phone in the hut. Lao picked it up, spoke fast in some Chinese, and then waited a few moments before he switched to Russian. He said that there were survivors who needed rescue, and then began reading off a set of coordinates while looking at a map. The search team came the next morning in 2 helicopters. They asked if they knew which direction I traveled, and since I had a rough idea, they flew us west. It looked like a great ocean of trees out there, like it would be impossible to find the wreck and my comrades. But then suddenly, someone pointed and shouted, and there it was. It looked tiny from the air, just a crumpled metal shape in that ocean of green. My comrades were still alive, huddled under a shelter that they made out of a tarp thrown over the crash plane's wing. When they heard the helicopters, some of them hobbled out and began waving. There were no places to land, so the rescue workers had to haul my wounded comrades up on stretchers attached to ropes. I was in a helicopter with Victor and Nadia. They were too weak to talk, but they did not need to. No words could have been adequate to describe what we felt in that moment. They took us to a hospital far away, and doctors set bones, gave us shots, and fed us broth. And then, after a week of treatment and rest, they flew us back to Leningrad. We thought that they would be happy to see us. But when our colleagues from the Institute met us at the airport, they looked nervous. And then when we got back to the Institute, they told us the bad news. Thanks to our failure, the ministry had decided to cut our funding. That was how things worked back then. We were punished for things we had no control over, quite literally adding insult to injury. And I was back at work after about 6 weeks. And for a long time, my knee would ache whenever it rained. And sometimes at night, I would wake up sweating after nightmares about the wolves. I still have one empty peanut bag in a drawer at home. It is faded and torn, but it serves as a reminder of what I have lived through and achieved. We survived not just because one person could walk, but because others were kind, and because sometimes fate gives you a chance. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations as I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. I would love to see you there. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All the links for everything are down in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, if not friend, why friend-shaped?